All right, good afternoon. We're gonna talk about Blackbeard the pirate today, plus some of his friends. So we'll get started, and I'm gonna start like this. First, I'm gonna take the mask off. And you have to be careful. Okay. First, we take the mask off. Then I get my reading glasses.
Oh, well, I know.
And I'm going to read you something to start with. Captain Bostock was having a bad morning. His merchant ship had been cornered by a large, menacing pirate ship called the Queen Anne's Revenge. Jeering cutthroats lined the rail of the larger ship and told him to come over in his ship's little boat. Grinning faces looked down at him as he climbed aboard the frigate. It was then that he saw him. Staring before him was the most frightening man he had ever clapped eyes on. A devilish-looking figure with wild eyes, surrounded by even wilder black hair. The pirate's beard was long and unkempt, plaited and hanging down over his chest. The same unkempt hair seemed to surround his face, and more plates stuck out on either side of his face. Surprisingly, the ends of these rat-tailed black plates were tied with twists of ribbon, which only seemed to make his appearance an even more disconcerting. The man was dressed in a long sea captain's coat crossed by two belts, a sword belt and a bandolier, where 3 brace of pistols hung from improvised holsters over his chest, making him look like a walking armory. Despite the sun, the man wore a small brown fur cap, the kind worn by seamen in cold weather. And beneath it, as if to complete the whole devilish image, 2 small lengths of slow-match wicks hung down behind each ear, the tips of the rope glowing red with wisps of smoke framing the pirate's head. He wanted to make an impression on this captain. As if this wasn't alarming enough, there were the eyes. The manic, staring eyes that glared at him from behind the hair. Henry Bostock had just met Blackbeard. All right. Now, so one of the things that struck me as strange when I first started reading about this was these dates right here. The age of pirates, and that's the way they spelled it, not me. I know how to spell pirate. The age of pirates, 1715, 1725. Really? 10 years. That is amazing to me. I thought the pirates were on, for centuries, because we have so many movies and so many books written about pirates. I thought it went on and on. But actually it was a short period of time, pretty much, and there's a reason for that. In 1724, a man that called himself Captain Charles Johnson in London wrote a book, and the title was the most notorious pirates, the history of the most notorious pirates. And he included about a dozen pirates. Captain Johnson, nobody ever heard of him. What it was a pen name. And he was written, people still don't know actually who Captain Johnson was, but a lot of people think it was a man by the name of Defoe. Now, for extra credit, what did was it Charles? Defoe. Henry Defoe. What did he write?
Daniel Defoe.
You're right, Daniel Defoe. What famous book did he write? The initials are the book are R.C.
Robinson Crusoe.
Extra credit. Robinson Crusoe. And he wrote other books too, but that was the most famous book that he wrote. Anyhow, this book became popular, and there were more, and it was published and published and published over and over, and the people in England and other parts of the world just were attracted to it, especially the story about Blackbeard. They seemed most interested in this devilish figure. So, all right, back to this question about why these years. Well, something happened in 1713. 1713, Queen Anne, the Queen of England, managed somehow to get the heads of European countries that had been fighting with each other for hundreds of years, and so for a while they met at a place called Utrecht in I think it's Denmark, I'm not sure. Anyhow, they signed the Treaty of Utrecht, and they agreed to stop pirating each other and stealing and and bothering and fighting with each other. It lasted for a while, not for long, but it lasted for a few years. So England had especially had these people they called privateers. And what were privateers? Privateers were legal pirates. So you remember, those of you that were here last time I talked, and we mentioned that 140 years before this, some investors like Sir Walter Raleigh went to Queen Elizabeth and said, we'd like to have some ships that would go out and get some of this stuff that the Spanish have. They're getting rich and we're poor, comparatively. So Queen Elizabeth said, I know nothing about it, but I get 10%. Plausible deniability, they call that today. Anyhow, so these people were the first privateers. They were legal pirates, and so this went on like over 100 years. They would harass the Spanish ships and steal all the silver and gold that they were getting in the New World and taking back to England. So 1713, they agreed to stop the privateering. Uh-oh. So what do these guys do? They're all out of work, all these privateers. So a lot of them ended up in a pirate haven called New Providence in the Bahamas. It's where Nassau is today. Great harbor. You can come in one way and go out the other way in case somebody comes after you, see. And so that became pirate hangout. And there was another group that was out of work that ended up becoming pirates. Who knows what logwood is? Logwood. Extra credit. Logwood. Well, I had no idea. So I Googled logwood, and guess what happened? Amazon wanted to sell me a bag of it. So I had to really look further to find out what logwood was. And down in Central America, which was Spanish country, there was a tree. And in the inner part of the tree, the heartwood, there's this reddish wood that they would cut up into chips and boil it, and it made wonderful dye, D-Y-E. Very valuable in Europe, because they like to dye all those clothes, and fancy clothes they had. Logwood workers, they had camps along the shore in Central America. And the Spanish says, we're tired of these people stealing our logwood. So they're out of work. So what they do, they decided, a lot of them, we'll become pirates too. So that's how it got started. So here are some of let's talk about some of the early pirates. A man named Jennings. In 1714 or 15, I think it was, the Spanish got together with their ships and they rendezvoused in Havana, and they were 12 ships loaded with gold and silver from the mines in South America, and sugar from the sugar plantations in the Caribbean islands. They got together and they would sail back to England, to Spain, excuse me. And I showed you this before, some of you. This is my crude map of the Atlantic Ocean. And the ships would follow the current, because they were sailing ships. They follow the current down to Africa and across the Atlantic into the Caribbean, up, and then catch the current here, up the coast of Florida and up the coast of North Carolina, and catch the other current across to get back to Europe. So these Spanish ships rendezvoused together in Havana, and then they come up the coast of Florida. Guess what happens in Florida in July and August?
Hurricane.
Yes, it was a terrible hurricane. 11 of the 12 ships were sunk right off the coast of Florida, near where Fort Pierce is today. Anybody know where Fort Pierce is? It's south of Melbourne and south of Cape Canaveral, about 25 or 30 miles. So this Jennings, this pirate, he was in the Bahamas, and he heard about it. Bahamas is right about 50 miles across from Florida. So he takes his crew and he sets sail. And the Spanish, by this time, had come up there with divers trying to go down and get off the bottom. They were right up near the beach. And so they had camps on the beach where they were bringing the gold and silver, you know. So what does Jennings do? He starts raiding the camps, stealing their gold and their silver, you know. And the Spanish were very upset, but who cares? In England, they kind of, well, we don't know anything about that, you know. So he's getting the gold and silver. Jennings, he's one of the first pirates. Okay? Another pirate was a man named Horngold, and it's spelled Horn-I-Gold. So, but I'm not going to say horny gold, but Horngold. Horngold was another early pirate, and he had a very accomplished seaman with him by the name of Edward Teach. And Edward Teach was doing a good job. Now, that's the first we ever heard of him. Was he a former privateer? Was he in the Royal Navy? What was he doing? We don't know. But he was on Hornigold's ship. And so Hornigold liked him. He liked the way he operated. So as soon as he captured a sloop, a small sloop, here's what a sloop is. A sloop is a one-masted ship. Got a foremast and an aft mast. Very shallow draft. It can go in shallow water. It's very fast, very maneuverable. That's the kind of ship the pirates really wanted, because that way they could get away from the big warships that the Royal Navy had and the Spanish had. And so he put Blackbeard, as he became called later on, he put Edward Teach in charge of a captured sloop. I was very impressed with his seamanship. He seemed to have been educated somewhat, because a big thing of his was books. That's one of the things that he stole most, with books, especially books on navigation. So that's the first hint we have of Edward Teach. Another pirate who was very famous is called Calico Jack. Calico Jack Rackham, and he was a wild man. And on one of the very last cruise before he was caught, he had 2 lady pirates. Well, lady may not be quite the right term. One of them was called Anne Bonney. She was an Irish girl. And the other was Mary Read. So they were around, let's see, around one of the islands in the Caribbean there. And they got, they captured a small ship that the people were turtle hunters. They had a boatload of turtles. And they eat the turtles. So they stopped them and took the turtles on board and were cooking them. But the turtle hunters also had a keg of rum, which was even better. So the turtle hunters joined in with the pirates, and they got good and drunk on the rum. I don't know if Mary Read and Anne Bonny were drinking rum or not, but anyhow, they were there. An English warship cornered them, and before they knew what was happening, they had boarded their little sloop, and so the men were fighting back, the pirates were fighting back as best they could, but they began to surrender. And the story is that Anne Bonny and Mary Read were calling them cowards and picked up their swords, and they started fighting back. But anyhow, they were all captured and taken to Kingston, Jamaica, where they were tried, getting ready to hang them. Well, they were all sentenced to be hanged, including the 2 women, but they said, wait a minute, Your Honors, said, we're pregnant. You know, are you really going to hang us? And so the judges said, well, no, that wouldn't be right. The unborn child is innocent. We can't hang them and kill the unborn child. So they put them in prison, saying, well, maybe we'll hang you after you have the baby. But that didn't happen. Mary Read, unfortunately, with some disease, she died in prison before she gave birth. But they let Anne Bonny out of prison before she gave birth. What happened to her then, there in Jamaica, we don't know. Disappeared. But there's a rumor that the descendant of Anne Bonny, like the 9th great-grandchild, is the director of the viral lab in Wuhan, China. But I don't know if that's true. Anyhow, I heard that. Somebody just made it up. All right. So, one more pirate I'll talk about before we get back to Blackbeard, and that's a man named Bonnett. Stede Bonnett. S-T-E-D-E was his name. Well, he was trying his hand at pirating, but he wasn't a good pirate at all. He was more of a gentleman, you know, and he just got into it, sort of, because he had some money to get a ship or something. Well, he wasn't a very good pirate, and this crew, by the way, pirate crews, it was amazing how democratic it was operated. So different from the way ships were run, you know, very autocratic and hard on the men. But the pirates said, no, we had enough of that. So now, if we don't like the captain, if we don't think he's doing a good job, we get rid of him. And we get somebody that can run this ship better. And we had rules about how the plunder was to be divided up. And they had all these rules. And it was much more, as I said, much more democratic. So, anyhow, Stede Bonnett was not a good pirate, and his crew didn't respect him. Well, somehow or other, Bonnett got his ship, his sloop, which was called the Adventure. We're going to hear more about the Adventure. Got his ship there with Blackbeard. By this time, Horngold had kind of sort of semi-retired. He liked staying there in the Bahamas. So Blackbeard had his ship going around the Caribbean, and Bonnett joined him. But then, when he wasn't doing a good job, Blackbeard sent his first mate over to run Bonnett's ship. And said, Bonnett, you come over here. And he's just stayed on Blackbeard's ship, stayed in the captain's cabin and read books or did something, you know. So that's what happened to him for now. But we'll hear more about Bonnett in a minute. So, looking at my notes here, the summer. Now it became summer of 1717. 1717. And Blackbeard had his ship, and he captured a ship, put his men to run it, put the captives ashore somewhere. Usually they didn't kill the captives unless they fought back. But if they just said, okay, we surrender, you know, they would generally put them ashore somewhere, or if they had a one little ship that wasn't in very good shape, they'd say, all of you get on that and go away, you know, this kind of thing. So generally they didn't go out and cut their throat unless they were fighting them, see. So anyhow, he had Bonnett on board his ship. So in 1717, the summer, Blackbeard was up off the coast of what is now the United States, which was the colonies. And by this time he had 2 or 3 ships with him that he had captured, sloops. They went off the coast of Charleston, which was called Charlestown in South Carolina. And he would park off the coast, and when ships came to go into the harbor, they didn't get in because he stopped them and he took all their stuff, and then he might let them go on in with an empty ship. He also went up, he liked it off the coast of Delaware Bay, because there was a lot of traffic coming out of Philadelphia. So he liked hanging around there and stealing what he could there. So that was the summer of 1717. And then toward the winter, they go south, you know, like a lot of people did. He went south down to the Caribbean, and he plundered Spanish ships there and off the coast of Central America, and he hung around there. Then in November 1717, an interesting thing happened. down there in the Caribbean, he captured a French slave ship. Great big ship, much different from the sloops. This was a 3-masted ship. And so he captured the French ship, and he put the Frenchmen ashore on some island, and the slaves also, except the ones that said, hey, we want to be a pirate. Only they probably didn't speak English, but they made it known they wanted to stay here. So Blackbeard said, fine. So he would pick out the ones that looked the strongest, and he put them on his ships too. So of course, the ones that the slaves were they thought it was a much better deal being a pirate than working in the sugarcane fields in the Caribbean. So that's what happened. So he named that ship the Queen Anne's Revenge. I'm not sure just why, but by the way, Queen Anne was dead by this time, you know. So anyhow, he renovated the ship. A lot of the cabins that are above deck, took all them off to make it faster, less wind resistant, less weight. You know, added new sails, as many sails as he could get on. So he was big enough, he could do battle with the big warships if he wanted to. He took, by the way, when he would capture a ship, say a sloop, they usually only had about 8 or 10 guns, that means cannons. He would take them on board Queen Anne's Revenge now, until the Queen Anne's Revenge had like 40 guns. You know, it was an enormous ship. So, okay. So after he renovated that ship, it was 1718. So he operated down off the coast of Central America, capturing a lot of ships, getting a lot of Spanish gold and all this kind of thing. And he didn't go back to the Bahamas, and there's a reason. The British by this time said, you know, we've had enough of this. So they sent a governor and some troops to Nassau in the Bahamas and going to set up there, and pirates, it wasn't a good place for pirates to hang around anymore. And they did something else. They said, we'll pardon anybody that turns themselves in and promises not to do this anymore. And so some pirates did that. They did that. So, but they all heard about it. By the way, they had their own way of communicating. They met another ship, they would come up alongside and say, what's the news? And they would tell them the news. So they kind of knew everything that was going on from each other. All right, 1718. So now it's May. And Blackbeard, and he's got 3 ships, smaller ships in his entourage. He goes up to Charlestown again. That's what they called it then. It wasn't Charleston yet. The colony of South Carolina was doing pretty well. They had rice, huge farms of rice there, and there was a big demand for that in Europe. And indigo, they use that for dye also. So he hung around off the coast of Charlestown for about a week at least. At first the ships came out. They had a pilot boat that came out first. By the way, every harbor in the world, in a developed country, when a ship comes to the port, pilot boat goes out, pilot gets on the ship and is in effect in charge as the ship comes into the harbor. I've got a nephew in the Galveston, Houston ship channel. He's been doing that for about 25 or 30 years. He's a harbor pilot. He makes an obscene amount of money too, but anyhow, so the harbor pilot came out and he didn't come back. So they kept his boat out there, you know, and so the people in Charleston said, why didn't he come back? Well, they found out. The next morning, some ships loaded with rice and whatever comes out of the harbor at Charlestown, and they get stopped, and their stuff stolen. And then they realized what was going on, but it was too late. Here comes other ships bringing stuff in to Charlestown from England or wherever, and they're stopped. They're plundered and their stuff taken away and all this kind of stuff. So that went on for about a week. In the meantime,